So let's take a look at number one. Just keep in mind on this final exam review that basically, if you can do this whole final exam review, then you should be able to do the final exam. Now, make sure as you go through here and do these questions that you're not just studying the question, but you're trying to study the overall concept of the question. All right, so like, here's what I mean by that. Number one, it says use the graph to determine the domain and range of a function. Write your answer using interval notation. Well, think of it this way. This question, we don't really care about part A, B, well, but we care that you can do these questions, but what we care about is can you determine the domain and range of a function using its graph? So the overall idea here is you look at a graph and figure out, oh, well, the domain is and the range is, and then you get these you get these right. Okay, so let's look at it. What is the domain of a function? Graphically, you're talking about all the, if you look at the graph, you're talking about all the x values that's used in this graph. So for instance, I look at part A. If I was to plot all the points on this graph, I want you to name every x point, every x value that's used on that point. Well, you can't do that because there's an infinite amount of them. So you have to use a range of, and I shouldn't say range, you have to use an interval to explain them. So basically, you say, well, my x's start over here. So the point right here is at 1, 2, 3, 4, -4, and I don't go up or down any. That's the starting. And over here is where it ends. So this is 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you go over 4, and then you go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then you go down 6. So the interval, and using interval notation, the interval for your domain would be starting from -4 and ending at 4. You always move left to right. And since they're open dots, we're going to use parentheses. If that had been a closed dot, then we use a square bracket. Right? And then what's the end here? Well, what's the range? Well, the end numbers will be your range. It starts at 0, the y coordinate, the y value is the range. So from 0 down to -6. So the range would be 0 to -6. All right, so let's do the next one. So on this one, I really don't have a grid. So all I have to go by is where the x value starts and where the x value ends. All right, so the domain here would be from -2 pi all the way over to 2 pi. And I know that sometimes it doesn't make sense if you have to have trig course, but all we're looking at is the x values. What's the domain? The other way I try to teach this in class is how wide is the function? How wide is that graph? So the width of it is from -2 pi to 2 pi. Now, those are closed dots, so I don't need parentheses, I need square brackets. And then part C, I'm sorry, that's the domain. So what's the range? Well, another way of looking at range is how tall is the graph? Well, the graph goes from 1 all the way down to -1, right? That's how tall it is, from 1 to -1. Or we're going to put the negative number first, and we're going to assume we include those. You always put the lowest number on the left. So your range would be -1 to 1. And part C. How wide is it for the domain? Looks like it goes from -2 to 4. And since those are closed dots, we're going to include them. That's the domain. And then how tall is it? It looks like it starts over here at -1, and then it goes all the way to -4. And we'll use square brackets again. So there's your domain and range of a graph.